Working time reduction is back on the agenda. In this project, we want to investigate working time reduction, and here we are especially interested in the introduction of a 4-day working week. This video will outline the key issues. We want to explore company practices, what is happening at the company level, while also mapping whether there are supportive measures, policies, either by governments or by social partners, that encourage and support these measures at company level. And at the company level, we are interested, first of all, to look at why was this decision taken, what was the process, who was involved in the decision making, who was against, who was for introducing a working time reduction. Then we want to know how exactly does it work? How does the model work? Is it something that is offered to all employees? Does it come with a reduction in pay? Is there some flexibility included there? So the actual model and how does it work? And then, of course, the third thing that we are very interested to explore is the impact. What does it do to productivity? What does it do to well-being of employees? Is there an impact on training? Is there an impact on attracting or retaining employees in the company? So basically, from a company perspective, the pros and cons of working time reduction, this project should really give us a good idea of what this is all about. Well, it's quite interesting to see that there was a bit of a lull in the discussion of working time reduction. If we go back to the 80s and 90s of the previous century, where we had a lot of initiatives to reduce working time, mainly in the context of high levels of unemployment, and the idea was if every worker works a little bit less, then more workers are needed and we can address the employment issue, the unemployment challenge through working time reduction. But then in the first decade and a half of this century, working time reduction was no longer a hot topic, and that changed not least due to the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, because that's when we started to experiment with different work practices, think remote work, for example. And that led to a rethinking of how much do we actually want to work, need to work? What is it? Is it actually necessary to continue working for 5-day weeks? Do we find a good balance between work and other things in our life in the current setup of a 40-hour week with 5 days per week in work? So these were experiences that triggered the debate. How long do we want and need to work? And then bring in the specific situation that we are now experiencing with a tight labor market, with labor shortages, not across the board, but in several sectors, when companies realize that offering shorter working time, offering, for example, a 4-day week, could make the difference to attract or retain the employees, the talent that they so desperately need.
What has changed now is that a group of workers can work hybrid. And this has put this idea of work-life balance much more to the front, because, people have been hearing for quite some time that, when you have hybrid work, you can stay at home and then, you can gain a little bit of time to, do things, pick up your children and whatever. So this idea of work-life balance is much more to the front. And this is quite important, in particular for those workers who can't work hybrid, because they have this idea that these people have it better, And work-life balance, what about my work-life balance? Am I not worth it? So I think it's put some of this into people's minds.
There's certainly a difference in the intensity that this topic, working time reduction, 4-day working week, is being discussed in the member states. We have 2 member states, Belgium and Greece, who recently introduced legislation that make the introduction of a 4-day week in companies for some groups of employees a possibility. Then we have very active debates in Austria, also in Ireland, Latvia, Lithuania, Portugal and also Spain. Spain has had a pretty large pilot project on the reduction of working time launched. Portugal did the same in this year, in June of this year. Ireland has had certain trials to see how does it work, and again to find out what are the pitfalls, what could be the negative intended or unintended effects, and what is really the positive impact of this reduction in working time. So a big difference in the intensity of the debate and how the issue is being discussed.
When it comes to gender differences, what we see is that if you take a life course perspective, there's across all the different life stages, if you wish, a desire to reduce working hours. The only exception is the very early stages of people's lives, when you're a young single person living with their parents, for instance. In principle, on average, people would like to work a bit more hours, but then from there on, and especially during the phases of your life where when people have children, then there's a strong desire to reduce working hours. And this desire is much larger for men than for women, and that's where you can find very strong gender differences.
Eurofound has been asked to implement this project on behalf of the European Commission, but the idea or the request to investigate the issue of working time reduction came from the European Parliament. The Parliament has the opportunity to request the investigation of issues that the Parliament considers of high importance through so-called pilot project. And this was such a request for a pilot project on working time reduction with a specific emphasis on the 4-day week. And through the European Commission, Eurofound was asked to implement this pilot project.